The strongest marriages are not destroyed by lies. Sometimes they are quietly tested by the truths that are never spoken. Lauren Mitchell opened her eyes for what felt like the 100th night in a row, as the soft glow of the digital clock beside the bed changed to 12:15 in the morning. The bedroom remained almost completely dark except for the pale moonlight slipping through the curtains. Beside her, the mattress shifted ever so slightly. Without making a sound, Daniel Carter carefully sat up, moving with the slow confidence of someone who had repeated the same routine countless times before. Lauren kept her breathing steady and her eyes barely open, pretending to remain asleep while watching him through lowered eyelashes. Daniel quietly reached for the neatly folded navy jacket hanging over the chair near the window. He slipped it on, checked the time on his wristwatch, and paused for just a moment to look back at her. His expression softened into the same gentle smile that had first made her fall in love with him 6 years earlier. Then, believing she was still sleeping peacefully, he quietly left the bedroom and closed the door without making the slightest sound. Lauren waited another full minute before slowly sitting upright. Her heart beat faster than it should have. The first time this happened, she convinced herself it was work. The second time, she blamed insomnia. By the 10th night, she wondered whether she had simply imagined everything. But after nearly 3 months of waking at exactly the same time and watching Daniel disappear into the night, she could no longer ignore the questions filling her mind. During the day, everyone admired their marriage. Friends joked that Lauren and Daniel were the couple who never argued. Neighbors smiled whenever they saw them walking hand in hand through their quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Chicago. Daniel had built a successful investment company without ever allowing wealth to change his kindness. Lauren often volunteered at local schools, and together they attended charity events, family gatherings, and community celebrations where everyone admired how naturally they supported one another. From the outside, their lives looked almost effortless. Even Lauren had believed that for a long time. Yet every perfect photograph hid the same unanswered mystery waiting beyond midnight. She quietly climbed out of bed and walked toward the bedroom window. Through a narrow opening in the curtains, she watched Daniel step into the driveway beneath the porch light. Instead of driving away immediately, he unlocked the trunk of his dark sedan and carefully placed a medium-sized canvas bag inside. He stood still for several seconds as though making sure nothing had been forgotten. Then he closed the trunk, entered the driver's seat, and disappeared into the empty streets. Lauren remained frozen beside the window until the taillights vanished completely. She had searched for obvious explanations. She checked credit card statements and found nothing unusual. Their bank accounts remained perfectly normal. His phone never displayed suspicious messages. His calendar showed only ordinary business appointments. Even his coworkers spoke warmly about him. Every logical explanation she considered slowly disappeared, leaving only deeper confusion behind. She walked into the kitchen intending to pour herself a glass of water when something small caught her attention beneath the edge of the dining table. A single old brass key rested quietly on the hardwood floor, reflecting the faint light above the sink. Lauren picked it up carefully. It looked nothing like the electronic keys they used every day. This one was worn with age, its edges smooth from years of use, and attached to a faded leather tag with only 3 handwritten numbers. 417. She turned the key over in her hand while listening to the silence filling the house. For the first time, she realized Daniel had left behind something he never intended anyone else to find. And deep inside, she felt that this forgotten key was about to unlock far more than an ordinary door. Lauren slipped the old brass key into the front pocket of her cardigan before the first light of dawn appeared beyond the kitchen window. She considered calling Daniel immediately, asking the simple question that had echoed in her mind for weeks. "Where do you go every night?" But every time she imagined the conversation, something held her back. It was not fear of the answer. It was fear that asking too soon would cause him to hide the truth even more carefully. By the time Daniel quietly returned home just before 6 o'clock, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee already filled the kitchen. Lauren stood by the counter preparing breakfast as though nothing unusual had happened. Daniel smiled warmly the moment he saw her. "You are up early," he said, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead before setting his car keys beside the fruit bowl. Lauren smiled naturally. I could not sleep. Daniel nodded with quiet understanding. I have an early meeting this morning. I may be home a little late tonight. The sentence sounded perfectly ordinary, yet Lauren noticed a brief hesitation before he spoke the final words. She simply wished him a good day. Throughout breakfast they talked about simple things. A neighborhood fundraiser planned for the weekend. Lauren's volunteer schedule at the local elementary school. A family dinner with Daniel's older sister the following Sunday. Nothing about their conversation suggested that one of them had spent another night quietly leaving the house after midnight. Watching Daniel laugh at one of her stories made everything even more confusing. He looked exactly like the man she had married. Thoughtful, patient, kind. There were no signs of guilt or nervousness. After Daniel left for work, Lauren carried her coffee into the home office. She opened her notebook and began writing down everything she knew. 12:15 every night. Home before sunrise. Canvas bag in the trunk. No unusual financial activity. No suspicious phone calls. No unexplained expenses. Now there was one more clue. The brass key marked with the numbers 417. She stared at the list for several minutes before realizing something unexpected. Every piece of evidence pointed away from betrayal rather than toward it. If Daniel had been living a secret life with someone else, surely there would have been messages, restaurant charges, unusual purchases, or unexplained absences during the day. Instead, his routine remained remarkably consistent. It almost resembled someone reporting for a second job rather than hiding an affair. That afternoon Lauren drove to the public library downtown, hoping to distract herself with volunteer planning materials. Yet even while organizing children's reading programs, her thoughts kept returning to the mysterious key resting inside her purse. On the drive home she stopped for groceries and happened to meet their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who smiled the moment she saw Lauren. Your husband was a blessing again last night, the older woman said cheerfully. Lauren blinked in surprise. Last night, Mrs. Henderson nodded. Around 11:30, he helped carry several heavy boxes into my garage before he left. Such a thoughtful young man. He never lets me lift anything by myself. Lauren thanked her politely, but her curiosity deepened. Daniel had left the house after midnight, yet somehow he had also helped their neighbor before then. The timeline still made sense, but it revealed another detail she had never known. Daniel quietly helped people without mentioning it afterward. As evening arrived, Lauren found herself watching the clock more than usual. She placed the brass key on the kitchen table and sat beside it, studying every scratch along its worn surface. Just before bedtime, Daniel walked into the room carrying a folded blanket from the laundry. He paused for the briefest moment when his eyes landed on the key. The gentle smile on his face did not disappear, but something changed in his expression. It lasted less than a second before he calmly picked up the key and slipped it into his pocket. I wondered where this went, he said softly. Then he looked at Lauren with quiet affection and added, Thank you for keeping it safe. Those simple words answered nothing, yet somehow made the mystery feel even larger than before. Lauren barely slept that night. She waited until Daniel's breathing became slow and steady before quietly opening her notebook again. The page now contained dozens of observations collected over the past several weeks. Every departure happened within 3 minutes of 12:15. Every return came shortly before sunrise. Every daytime routine remained completely unchanged. If Daniel was living a double life, it was the most carefully disciplined one she had ever imagined. Yet nothing about his character fit that explanation. The following morning, after Daniel left for his office, Lauren decided she needed facts instead of assumptions. She drove back to the neighborhood where she had first met Daniel years earlier, hoping that familiar places might somehow lead to unfamiliar answers. Their favorite coffee shop still occupied the corner across from the small park where he had proposed. The owner immediately recognized her and greeted her warmly. During their conversation, he smiled while mentioning how often Daniel quietly stopped by before sunrise to purchase several large containers of fresh coffee. Lauren felt her attention sharpen. Before sunrise? She asked gently. The owner nodded. Almost every week. He always orders enough for a crowd, but he never says where he is taking it. Lauren thanked him and left carrying more questions than when she arrived. Later that afternoon she sat inside her parked car reviewing everything she had learned. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned Daniel helping with heavy boxes before midnight. The coffee shop owner described him buying coffee before dawn. Neither story hinted at deception. Both described quiet acts of service. The pattern was beginning to change. Instead of asking who Daniel might be meeting, Lauren found herself wondering who depended on him every night. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, she made a decision she had avoided for weeks. Tonight she would follow him. She prepared carefully, choosing comfortable shoes and a dark jacket suitable for the cool autumn air. Shortly after midnight, she once again watched Daniel quietly leave the house carrying the familiar canvas bag. This time she waited until his sedan turned the corner before slipping into her own vehicle. She kept several car lengths behind him while the nearly empty streets carried them away from the quiet suburbs and toward an older district on the western side of Chicago. The neighborhoods gradually changed. Modern office buildings gave way to brick storefronts, historic churches, and tree-lined streets where small local businesses stood beside apartment buildings that had served families for generations. Daniel eventually slowed beside a modest 3-story brick building tucked between a community garden and a small public library. There was no bright sign, no impressive entrance, and nothing that suggested a wealthy businessman would visit after midnight. Lauren parked across the street beneath a large maple tree and watched from a distance. Daniel stepped out carrying the canvas bag before unlocking a weathered side entrance with the old brass key marked 417. Warm light spilled softly into the quiet street as the door opened. For a brief moment Lauren caught sight of shelves filled with books, folding tables, donated supplies, and colorful artwork hanging along the hallway walls. A few minutes later, another volunteer arrived carrying several grocery boxes. Daniel greeted the man with a friendly smile before helping unload everything inside. Soon an elderly woman entered with homemade soup. Then a young couple arrived carrying blankets. One by one, ordinary people quietly gathered without cameras, publicity, or recognition. Lauren remained motionless behind her steering wheel, staring at the simple brick building. Whatever Daniel had been protecting all these months, it was clearly much larger than himself. She looked once more toward the softly illuminated doorway just as a small brass plaque beside the entrance briefly reflected the streetlight, revealing only 3 carefully engraved words that immediately filled her with quiet curiosity. Carter Community House. Lauren remained inside her car for nearly 20 minutes, watching the quiet rhythm unfolding beyond the weathered brick walls of Carter Community House. There were no flashing signs, no reporters, and no audience waiting to applaud anyone's generosity. People simply arrived carrying ordinary things: fresh bread, grocery bags, folded blankets, children's books, a box of art supplies. Every volunteer greeted the others with warm smiles that spoke of familiarity rather than obligation. Daniel moved among them naturally, lifting heavy containers, arranging folding tables, checking supplies, and greeting each person by name. Lauren had attended countless charity galas with him over the years, surrounded by photographers and carefully planned speeches. This place felt completely different. Nothing here appeared designed for recognition. Everything existed only to help. Curiosity slowly replaced uncertainty. Lauren stepped quietly from her car and crossed the street, remaining far enough away to avoid being noticed. Through one of the large front windows, she could now see the main gathering room. Several families sat together enjoying warm meals while volunteers prepared fresh coffee and organized donated clothing along neatly labeled shelves. Children colored pictures at one table while an elderly man patiently helped another child finish a school assignment. The atmosphere felt peaceful, almost like an extended family gathering rather than an emergency shelter. Daniel knelt beside a young boy struggling to assemble a small model airplane. Instead of hurrying away, he patiently worked beside him until the child smiled with quiet pride. Lauren had never seen that moment before, yet somehow it reflected the same patient kindness Daniel showed every day at home. A few minutes later, an older woman approached Daniel carrying a small notebook. They spoke briefly before both walked toward a modest office near the back of the building. Lauren quietly circled the side of the property, careful not to disturb anyone. One office window remained slightly open, allowing soft voices to drift into the cool night air. She did not intend to listen, yet one sentence immediately caught her attention. "Your mother would be proud that you never gave up," the older woman said gently. Daniel answered after a thoughtful pause. "I promised her this place would never close as long as I was able to keep the doors open." Lauren felt her heart tighten. She had known Daniel's mother passed away several years before they met, but he rarely spoke about that time in his life. She remembered only one conversation when he quietly mentioned growing up in a neighborhood where many families depended on community programs after working long hours. He had never described this building. The older woman handed Daniel a folder. "The roof repairs can wait another month if necessary," she suggested kindly. Daniel shook his head with quiet certainty. "Winter will arrive sooner than we think. Families should never have to worry whether this building will stay warm. We will find a solution." Lauren watched as he opened the folder. Inside were maintenance estimates, volunteer schedules, food inventory lists, and handwritten notes rather than corporate reports. His midnight routine suddenly became much easier to understand. Every evening after leaving their comfortable home, Daniel came here to make sure someone else had one. She remained outside for another hour, quietly observing without interrupting. Daniel served meals, repaired a loose cabinet door, stacked donated supplies, swept the hallway, and spent time speaking with every visitor as though each conversation mattered. No one treated him like a wealthy businessman. They simply welcomed him as someone who always arrived when help was needed. As volunteers gradually finished cleaning for the night, Daniel switched off lights one room at a time before locking the front entrance with the old brass key. Lauren stepped back into the shadows before he emerged. Watching him drive away beneath the quiet glow of the streetlights, she realized the greatest secret in her marriage had never been hidden because Daniel lacked trust. It had been hidden because he believed some promises were too sacred to place in the spotlight. Lauren drove home just as the first hint of sunrise painted the eastern sky with soft shades of gold. The quiet streets that had once filled her with suspicion now felt strangely peaceful. She parked in the driveway and remained inside the car for several minutes, replaying every moment she had witnessed during the night. Daniel had not been hiding another relationship. He had not been chasing wealth or escaping their marriage. Instead, he had quietly carried a promise that demanded time, energy, and compassion without ever asking for recognition. The realization filled her with equal parts admiration and regret. She walked into the silent house moments before Daniel arrived, careful to leave no sign that she had followed him. By the time he stepped through the front door shortly before 6 o'clock, Lauren was already preparing breakfast exactly as she had the previous morning. Daniel smiled warmly. "You are becoming an early riser," he joked gently while hanging his jacket beside the kitchen door. Lauren smiled back, but this time she looked at him differently. She noticed the faint dust on the sleeves of his jacket, the tiny scratch on one hand that probably came from repairing something inside the community house, and the quiet exhaustion behind his eyes that he always tried to hide beneath kindness. She suddenly understood that every sunrise had found him returning not from comfort but from service. During breakfast, Daniel spoke about an upcoming board meeting for his investment company and asked Lauren how preparations for the school fundraiser were progressing. Their conversation remained light, yet Lauren found herself listening more carefully than ever before. Every pause, every gentle smile, and every thoughtful question reminded her of the man she had first fallen in love with. After Daniel left for work, Lauren could no longer ignore the questions that remained unanswered. That afternoon she returned to the neighborhood surrounding Carter Community House, this time in broad daylight. The building looked even more welcoming beneath the afternoon sun. Children laughed in the small community garden while volunteers organized donated books near the entrance. Lauren hesitated before walking inside. A cheerful elderly woman standing behind the reception desk greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome. Is this your first visit?" Lauren nodded politely. "I was hoping to learn more about this place." The woman introduced herself as Margaret Ellis, the volunteer coordinator who had served the center for more than 20 years. As they talked, Margaret proudly showed Lauren classrooms, a food pantry, a reading room, and small offices where volunteers helped families apply for educational programs and community assistance. Photographs covering one hallway documented decades of neighborhood history. Lauren slowly walked past them until one particular picture caught her attention. It showed a much younger Daniel standing beside a graceful woman with kind eyes in front of the same brick building many years earlier. Both were holding paintbrushes while smiling beside a newly restored entrance. Beneath the photograph rested a simple plaque. Community Renovation Day, dedicated to Evelyn Carter and the volunteers who believed every family deserves a place of hope. Lauren quietly traced the engraved name with her fingertips. Evelyn Carter was Daniel's mother, wasn't she? Margaret's gentle smile softened immediately. She founded this place almost 30 years ago, she replied. After she became seriously ill, Daniel promised her that these doors would never close. Most people assume generous donations keep us operating. But the truth is Daniel has quietly carried this responsibility for years. Even when business became difficult, he never broke that promise. Lauren looked back at the photograph with tears gathering in her eyes. Suddenly every midnight departure, every tired smile, every canceled evening, and every unexplained absence fit together with heartbreaking clarity. Daniel had not been running away from his marriage. Every night, he had been running toward a promise made to the woman who taught him that true success is measured by how many lives you quietly help when no one is watching. Lauren returned home carrying far more than the memory of an old photograph. She carried an entirely different understanding of the man she had married. Every doubt that had quietly grown inside her during the past several months now seemed painfully incomplete. Daniel had never hidden another life from her. He had simply protected a promise so deeply personal that he believed sharing it would somehow diminish its meaning. That evening the house felt unusually peaceful. Lauren prepared dinner while the setting sun filled the kitchen with warm golden light. She heard the familiar sound of Daniel's car pulling into the driveway shortly after 6 o'clock. A few moments later he stepped inside carrying his leather briefcase and smiled the same gentle smile she had seen every evening for years. Only this time Lauren noticed the tiredness behind it. She realized he had probably slept no more than a few hours every night for months while balancing his company, their home, and the community center. Daniel placed his briefcase beside the front door and walked into the kitchen. "Something smells wonderful," he said with a grateful smile. Lauren laughed softly. "I wanted us to have dinner together before another busy night begins." Daniel paused almost imperceptibly before answering. "I would like that." They sat together at the dining table, talking about ordinary things at first. The changing autumn weather, weekend plans, Lauren's students at the elementary school, Daniel's upcoming meetings. Yet beneath every comfortable sentence rested the conversation neither of them had ever found the courage to begin. After dinner Lauren quietly gathered the plates while Daniel started loading the dishwasher. They moved around one another with the effortless familiarity that comes only after years of marriage. Finally Lauren turned off the kitchen faucet and gently dried her hands. "Daniel," she said softly. He immediately looked toward her. "Can we talk?" He nodded without hesitation. They settled into the living room where the fireplace cast a gentle glow across the room. For several long moments neither of them spoke. Lauren finally reached into her purse and carefully placed a small photograph on the coffee table. It was the picture of Daniel standing beside his mother outside Carter Community House many years earlier. Daniel stared at the photograph in complete silence. His shoulders slowly lowered as though a weight he had carried for years had finally become impossible to hold any longer. He closed his eyes briefly before opening them again. "You went there," he said quietly. Lauren nodded. "I followed you." Daniel looked down at his hands. There was no anger in his expression, no disappointment, only quiet acceptance. "I always hoped you would never have to discover it that way," he admitted. Lauren moved closer until they were sitting side by side. "Why did you never tell me?" Daniel took a slow breath before answering. "Because I made that promise to my mother during the final weeks of her life. She worried people would eventually see the community center as another charity funded by successful business leaders. She wanted it to remain a place built by neighbors helping neighbors. She asked me never to turn it into something that brought attention to our family. Lauren listened without interrupting. Daniel continued quietly. When we married, I planned to tell you everything after I found a way to balance both worlds. But every year the center needed something else. A roof repair, new heating, food supplies, school programs. Families kept arriving. There was never a perfect time. The longer I waited, the harder it became to explain why I had stayed silent. Lauren gently took his hand. I spent months wondering whether you were slowly leaving our marriage. Daniel's eyes filled with sadness. I know. Every night I walked out that door, I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I told myself I was protecting my mother's wish, but I never realized I was asking the woman I loved to carry confusion instead of truth. Lauren leaned against his shoulder. You never had to carry any of this alone. Daniel quietly rested his forehead against hers. For the first time in many months, neither of them felt the need to protect the other with silence. They finally understood that real love was never strengthened by hidden burdens. It became stronger the moment two people chose to carry them together. The next evening, when the clock quietly approached 12:15, Lauren no longer pretended to be asleep. She simply reached for her sweater, slipped on comfortable shoes, and waited beside the bedroom door. Daniel had just picked up the familiar canvas bag when he noticed her standing there with a calm smile. For a brief moment neither of them spoke. Then Daniel gently lowered the bag onto the floor. You should be resting, he said softly. Lauren walked toward him and shook her head with quiet certainty. Not tonight. If this place has been part of your life for so many years, then I would like it to become part of mine too. Daniel searched her eyes, almost expecting hesitation or disappointment. Instead he found only kindness. A slow smile appeared across his face, warmer than any Lauren had seen in months. Are you sure? He asked. She nodded. Marriage means walking beside each other, even after midnight. They drove through the quiet streets together, talking more during that short drive than they had during many evenings over the past year. Daniel shared stories about growing up inside Carter Community House while his mother organized reading programs, neighborhood dinners, and after-school activities. Lauren listened carefully, realizing she was finally discovering pieces of his childhood that had never found their way into conversation before. When they arrived, the volunteers greeted Daniel warmly as always, but their expressions quickly turned into delighted surprise when they saw Lauren walking beside him. Margaret Ellis stepped forward with a welcoming smile and gently embraced Lauren. We have been hoping to meet you for a long time, she said kindly. Lauren looked toward Daniel with amused curiosity. Everyone already knew about me? Daniel laughed quietly. Every birthday, every anniversary, every vacation photo. They probably know more about you than you realize. The room filled with gentle laughter, immediately dissolving any lingering awkwardness. Before long, Lauren found herself helping organize donated children's books, while another volunteer showed her the reading corner where elementary students gathered every evening to complete homework before their parents finished late work shifts. She watched retired teachers patiently tutoring children, college students preparing meals beside local business owners, and neighbors folding clean laundry together while exchanging ordinary conversations about family, sports, and weekend plans. Nothing about the building felt temporary. It felt like a second home created entirely through kindness. Daniel quietly repaired a loose bookshelf before joining a group of teenagers preparing college scholarship applications. Lauren noticed how naturally everyone trusted him. They did not admire him because he owned a successful company. They admired him because he always appeared when someone needed help. Later that night, Lauren helped serve warm soup beside Daniel. An elderly gentleman accepted his meal before smiling warmly at both of them. Your mother always said no one should have to face tomorrow on an empty stomach, he told Daniel. She would be proud to see the two of you standing here together. Daniel smiled gratefully before introducing Lauren. She is the best part of my life. Lauren felt tears quietly gathering again, but this time they carried no sadness. They carried relief. Near the end of the evening, Margaret handed Lauren an old scrapbook documenting the community house from its earliest days. Inside were photographs spanning decades, showing neighborhood celebrations, graduation ceremonies, holiday dinners, literacy programs, and volunteer projects that had quietly transformed countless lives. One empty page remained near the end. Margaret gently closed the book and smiled. Your mother-in-law always believed every generation should add its own chapter instead of simply reading the last one. Perhaps it is time for both of you to write the next page together. Lauren looked toward Daniel, who silently reached for her hand. She understood immediately that their marriage was no longer defined by unanswered questions or hidden routines. It had found a shared purpose, and for the first time in many months, the road ahead felt brighter than the one behind them. Several weeks passed, and for the first time since their wedding, midnight no longer marked the beginning of unanswered questions. Instead, it became the hour when Lauren and Daniel quietly left their home together, carrying donated books, fresh meals, school supplies, and warm conversations to Carter Community House. Their routine gradually became second nature. Daniel continued leading his investment company during the day while Lauren expanded her volunteer work, creating evening literacy programs for children whose parents worked late shifts. Together they discovered that serving others did not take time away from their marriage, quietly strengthened it. One Friday afternoon, Margaret Ellis approached them with unexpected news. The city selected our community house to receive this year's Neighborhood Impact Award, she announced with a bright smile. Daniel immediately shook his head. There are many organizations that deserve recognition more than we do. Margaret smiled knowingly. You do not have a choice this time. The selection committee visited anonymously for months. They watched volunteers, interviewed families, and reviewed years of community records before making their decision. Daniel exchanged a quiet glance with Lauren. He had spent years making certain his work remained unnoticed, yet the recognition had arrived without anyone asking for it. A week later, the neighborhood park filled with families, volunteers, teachers, business owners, and local officials gathered beneath colorful autumn trees. Children laughed while musicians played soft acoustic music near the stage. Food trucks lined the walking paths, and tables displayed photographs documenting decades of service at Carter Community House. Lauren slowly walked through the exhibit, recognizing many of the images she had first seen inside the old scrapbook. There were photographs of neighborhood cleanup days, graduation celebrations, holiday dinners, reading nights, and smiling families whose lives had quietly intersected inside the brick building. What surprised her most was the final display. It contained no staged portraits of Daniel receiving awards or making speeches. Instead, every photograph showed him doing ordinary things, carrying grocery boxes, repairing shelves, reading stories to children, sweeping hallways, sharing meals with volunteers. None of the pictures appeared planned. They had simply captured a man consistently showing up whenever someone needed help. As the ceremony began, the event organizer invited several community members to share their experiences. One by one, they stepped onto the small outdoor stage. A retired teacher described how Daniel quietly funded evening tutoring programs without allowing his name to appear anywhere. A single mother explained how the community house helped her finish college while caring for her children. A firefighter thanked the volunteers for supporting families after difficult emergencies. Every story carried the same message. Quiet kindness changes lives long before anyone notices it. Finally, the organizer invited Daniel to the stage. He accepted the microphone with visible humility before looking toward the audience. I appreciate this honor, he began calmly. But Carter Community House has never belonged to one person. My mother believed that strong communities are built when ordinary neighbors decide someone else's well-being matters just as much as their own. Every volunteer standing here tonight has carried that belief forward. He paused before reaching for Lauren's hand. For many years, I thought protecting that promise meant carrying it alone. I recently learned that even the strongest promises become stronger when they are shared with the people we love. Warm applause filled the park as Daniel smiled toward Lauren. She realized the greatest recognition of the evening was not the award itself. It was watching the man she loved finally allow others to stand beside him instead of quietly carrying every responsibility in silence. Beneath the fading autumn sunlight, surrounded by grateful neighbors whose lives had been touched through simple acts of kindness. Lauren understood that genuine leadership is rarely announced. It quietly reveals itself through years of faithful service, one ordinary midnight at a time. 1 year later, the quiet rhythm of Lauren and Daniel's life had changed in ways neither of them could have imagined during those uncertain nights filled with unanswered questions. Their home still looked much the same from the outside, the same front porch, the same maple tree shading the driveway, and the same bedroom where Lauren had once watched the clock strike 12:15 with a heart full of doubt. Yet everything inside those walls felt different because silence no longer carried fear. It carried peace. Every evening they shared dinner without rushing through conversations. Every challenge was discussed openly. Every decision belonged to both of them. Shortly before midnight, they still gathered the familiar canvas bags, but now they packed them together. Lauren carefully organized children's books while Daniel loaded fresh food donations into the car. They smiled at one another with the quiet confidence that only complete trust can create. Carter Community House had also entered a new chapter. Thanks to growing community support, the building had expanded its evening literacy program, added career mentoring workshops, and opened a larger family resource room. None of those changes happened because of one generous donation or one successful fundraiser. They happened because hundreds of ordinary neighbors decided to contribute small acts of kindness, inspired by the example quietly lived out inside those brick walls. Margaret Ellis often laughed that the community house no longer belonged to any single family. It belonged to everyone willing to open the door for another person. One evening, as Lauren arranged books inside the reading room, she noticed the old scrapbook resting on a nearby shelf. Curious, she opened it once again. The final page that had remained blank months earlier was no longer empty. It now held photographs of volunteers reading with children, families sharing warm meals, students celebrating scholarships, neighborhood gardens in full bloom, and one simple picture of Lauren and Daniel standing together outside the entrance beneath the Carter Community House sign. There was no formal pose. They were simply smiling while carrying boxes of donated books. Beneath the photographs, Margaret had written a single handwritten sentence. "Every promise becomes stronger when it is shared with love." Lauren gently closed the scrapbook and looked across the room. Daniel was helping a young girl choose her first chapter book while patiently encouraging her to believe she could read every page. The little girl proudly hugged the book before running toward her mother with a smile that seemed brighter than the evening lights. Lauren realized she had once believed the greatest gift in her marriage was finding a husband who appeared perfect. Now she understood something far more meaningful. Perfection had never been the goal. Honest love had always been enough. As they locked the building together later that night, Daniel reached into his pocket and removed the old brass key marked with the faded numbers 417. He placed it gently into Lauren's hand. She looked at him with quiet surprise. Daniel smiled warmly. "It should belong to both of us now," he said. Lauren wrapped her fingers around the worn key, remembering the night she had first found it beneath the dining table. Back then it had represented confusion, unanswered questions, and hidden midnight journeys. Tonight it represented trust, shared purpose, and a future they would continue building together. They walked side by side toward their car beneath a sky filled with quiet stars, leaving the community house behind until another midnight called them back. Sometimes people still admired their marriage from a distance and described it as perfect. Lauren would simply smile to herself because she knew the truth. Their marriage had never become beautiful by avoiding hardship. It became beautiful the moment they chose honesty over assumptions, partnership over silence, and compassion over pride. Long after midnight, while the city slept peacefully around them, two ordinary people continued keeping an extraordinary promise together, proving that the strongest love stories are not written in grand celebrations but in the quiet choices made every single day when no one else is watching.